In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So I was watching part of the coverage of the Olympics last night, and Ryan Lochte was being interviewed by Matt Lauer, that one, on NBC. Are most of you familiar with the situation that happened this week where there was this supposed robbery last weekend that our Olympians, 3 of our swimmers, were involved with, and there was great controversy over it throughout the week. And now the stories are still quite different in terms of what we are hearing reported and how people are owning up to what they did, et cetera, et cetera. But it's very interesting to hear the perspective of 3 different people who were involved in apparently the same activity. And one of the things I love to do with people who are talking about relationships and difficulty in being in relationship with either a spouse or a child or a friend, what have you, one of the things I like to do is hold up an object like a magazine and ask the people to sit on either side and have them reflect back to me what they see. And of course we see the front of this book, but what I see is the back of the book. And we're looking at the exact same object, correct? But we're seeing 2 different things because we have different perspectives on what it is that we're looking at. And so the old adage, there's always 2 sides to every story, certainly is something that is oftentimes true. Sometimes we have the same perspective, but in the gospel today, we have that 2 sides of the same story approach. And we first of all look at the leader of the synagogue, who is in the temple trying to do what he knows is right. He is engaged in understanding the law. He's probably one of the lawyers and knows the 10 Commandments. Right? And so he is very articulate in making sure that Jesus knows that, wait a second here, everybody. The commandment says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And he does a very good job of saying exactly what is in the law. And that this is what we are supposed to do. And so from his perspective, we have to wonder why it was that he might have been so locked into that. And the origin of the 10 Commandments has something to do with this particular law, this law of remembering the Sabbath, because the Israelites were given the 10 Commandments as they had left Egypt. If you remember the story, they're leaving Egypt, and it's Moses who is given these commandments to give to the people. And the people probably received this commandment with great delight, because they were slaves in Egypt. And we have to expect that they were working 7 days a week, 24/7 hours, right? Because they were under the guidance and the rule and the command of the masters that they were serving. So for them to hear that they had to stop and take a day of rest would be a very welcoming kind of situation, don't you think? That if you've come out of 40 years of slavery and now all of a sudden the rules are changing, and it's a time that we can relax and rejoice in the Lord and worship and be strengthened spiritually, whatever. So from their perspective, this law would be very welcoming, as well as probably the other 9 in addition. So for the leader of the synagogue, his perspective was one of not only keeping the law, but understanding that this was more or less a gift that they were given many years before this time. The woman, a second perspective, would have been the one who came in bent, as it says in the gospel, bent over, unable to even look up. She was that crippled. And to be that crippled, I imagine she was in some kind of severe pain, because this had been going on in her life for 18 years. But at the same time, I think we can assume that she was a woman who was very aware of the law and was trying to be law-abiding. It probably took her much longer than anybody else to make her way to the temple, going through the streets, the crowds of the people, making her way there. So for her, she had, no doubt, the same mindset as the leader of the synagogue. That this is something we need to do, we have been taught to do this, and this is the law. Yet Jesus, in his compassion and in his mercy and out of love, sees this woman and says to her, basically, you are healed, and goes over and lays his hands on her, and she, in fact, stands up straight and starts rejoicing. So we're left with quite a dilemma, aren't we? Because you can't really fault the leader of the synagogue, who was keeping one of the 10 Commandments and observing it and trying to say, this is what we're supposed to be doing. What's wrong with doing this on another day of the week? Yet Jesus, with his love and his compassion, understands that this situation is slightly different, and that this warrants stepping out of the box. And so we have to look at this dilemma and try to make sense of it from Jesus' perspective. Certainly we know that the commandments were given to all of us, these 10 commandments, and they were given for a reason. I don't think that they were given as restrictions, as punishment, as something to be used to beat people over the head and say, you're doing something wrong and therefore. Rather, they were given to the Israelites as a way to rule them, rein them in, to give them boundaries, to understand how life abundant can be available to all people if we do certain things. If we don't steal from our neighbor, if we don't commit adultery, and on the commandments go. Not as a way to say, restrictions, stand back, and you're going to be punished if this is wrong, if you do it wrong, but rather, if we want a good life together in community, this is what will help us do that. And so, again, there are two ways to look at all the commandments, as rules, as ways to control us, or as ways to help us, and to help us live a better life. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, and so the Sabbath was a day of rest. The Sabbath was a day when we were not, as children, supposed to play cards on Sunday. I am not sure what the difference was between cards and Monopoly, but we were not supposed to play cards. And you see, this is how laws and rules can be misused, in my opinion. Okay? Because when you start trying to interpret the law, I think that's where we get into trouble. So laws that are meant to be for our good oftentimes can go on the opposite direction. And certainly we're engaged in that in this country today, as we're trying to look at gun control and the fact that we have rights as citizens to bear arms, as it says in our laws of the land. But on the flip side, if you look at it from compassion and mercy and love as we do as Christians, why do citizens need to have assault weapons, as an example? And so we get caught up in this stuff all the time. I think that one of the things that we have to always remember is with our God, we know the good news of when we fall short of doing what is right for ourselves and for our neighbor, that we are forgiven and that we are always given a fresh start. But we are also held accountable for understanding how to help our neighbor. Jesus did not set this law to the side. He did not say that law is no longer valid. He did not negate the 10 Commandments. He did say, of course, the greatest commandment is that we love one another and love our neighbors as ourselves and love our God with our whole heart, mind, and soul. He told us that. But he did not say, throw away the 10 Commandments. Because you see, there's still a wonderful rule for how to guide what we do with our life. To know what the difference is between right and wrong, and what makes us feel good on the inside. If we cheat on our taxes, we might not get caught, but how do we feel? How do we respond as a human being? What is our mental health like? And on and on we go. And so this idea of the Sabbath has certainly changed over time. And probably what the leader of the synagogue, or the leaders in those days, those who understood the law, one of their fears might have been, you know what, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, right? And so, as I was growing up, things started shifting a little bit, okay? I mean, I have lived, and we have all lived through the time when stores were closed on Sunday to where stores are now open on Sunday. And part of the result of that in this economy is that there are some people now who work 7 days a week again because they need to work 2 jobs in order to pay rent, feed children, or what have you. And so the Sabbath has started to lose its importance over time. And I think as our response, and I was thinking about this in particular to us as a community, we are here this morning because we still know that this is our Sabbath. This is a time for us to come and worship our God and be together as a community. But yet we are sitting in the midst of a community that doesn't necessarily honor that. That there is a different culture that we are in at the university. That our expectations of having students get up on a Sunday morning and come to church at 8 or 10 in the fall might be extreme, okay? Because it's not necessarily that they don't want to be spiritual or that they don't want to be part of the community, but their lifestyle is different than ours. When they study late, they sleep late. It's not all about those who are going out and partying, etc., etc. It's a different culture. And so I think one of our challenges, one of the things that we need to do as a community is to continue to try to understand alternatives to offer to students. And so the second week of when the students are back in school, we're going to be hosting student focus groups, what I call student focus groups, to try to bring the students together. And you heard me talk about this for those of you who were present in July when I talked about the vision for the campus ministry moving forward, is to try to gather students together to say, what can we do to help you grow spiritually? Not what can we do to make you come to church, not what can we do to have you adopt our style, but rather what would work for you. Because the idea behind the Sabbath is rest and recreation and a time to be with God, focus on our relationship. It's not necessarily, and I'm probably saying heresy now, but it's not necessarily about a specific time or place. It's not about a specific action. It's to honor God and to have God be part of our lives and to know that this is where the source of our life comes from. And to try to offer that to students in a different way, I think is something that we can all look at and try to be part of. And so during the focus groups, Rob's going to be with me. Rob Izzy, who is our new deacon in training postulant, who will be with us this coming year. And Kente and Kevin Burke, 2 of our students, will be joining me, and Rich Youngkin, I believe also, and Dick Catholic. Anyway, we're going to have people talking with the students to try to understand this, and I hope whatever we come up with, we as a community can support and embrace and try to be present with them. And so this idea of law is always a tricky thing because laws are made supposedly for the common good. But yet we must always look at those laws with the eyes of God. And that's why some laws change. That's why I am standing in front of you as a woman ordained. Think about that. Because canon law, back until the 70s, said I couldn't do this. And I am married to Anne. And the laws have changed. And so we must always be open to hear what God is saying with His love and His compassion as we try to honor the laws of the land, the laws of the church, the laws that God has given to us. but to never, ever, ever forget or ever go against the greatest commandment, which is to love God with our whole heart, mind, body, and soul, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Amen.